often when we see persons with disability, we pity, we feel bad for them, we feel sorry, but what they really need is empathy, care, support, so that they can grow and really achieve success in life, and we can reduce the inequalities. The idea of our campaign, what we're trying to put across, and especially the theme this month, is the month of love. And it's important that we leave no one behind. We sometimes tend to undermine the potentials of individuals as well as humanity. So today we have someone really special. She's India's first female disabled stand-up comedian. We have with us Nidhi Goyal. She uses humor to challenge the prevailing notions about disability as well as gender. Nidhi, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a real pleasure to speak with you. The first thing what I want to ask you, of course, we are going to be talking about how important love is, especially when we take care of persons with disability. But, you wanted to be a portrait painter, and today you're making so many people laugh and you feel so much joy in their lives. How did comedy happen to you?
Hi, Ambika. Thank you so much for having me here. It's really interesting because when you say how did comedy happen to me, everything connects back to my disability, right? When I was diagnosed and I started losing my sight at the age of 15, yes, I knew just one thing, that I couldn't be a portrait painter or a fine artist anymore, right? For me, the question was, what do I do next? And this was a very big question because I was preparing for this kind of dream since I was 4. And I remember sitting across my spiritual guru, waiting for his guidance, and he telling me that, don't worry, you are really fixating on the problem. You need to start looking around you and looking at the privileges that you have, looking at what kind of support exists for you, and seeing the gaps and looking at other people with disabilities, and I started doing that. And I thought, yes, there is something that I need to do. I need to work with and for other people with disabilities who are not as privileged, who don't have the kind of family support that I have, yes, who don't have the kind of language and other privilege access and the caste class access that privilege that I have, and so on and so forth. And that's how I became an activist. After being a media professional, a journalist, I moved into activism. And once I moved into activism, of course, I was working and writing and campaigning and protesting, maybe not so much, but trying to bring that change, advocating, running awareness pieces and so on. But I thought comedy that comes out of my own life experiences, yes, living as a woman with a disability, really makes people laugh and cringe maybe at the same time. It helps them reflect in a non-threatening way on what this change needs to be for persons with disabilities.
How did you really diagnose that you're losing sight at the age of 15, like you told us? And also, what were the challenges associated? Yes, you were blessed, and I think you looked at it positively by looking at the better things, like, whether it was the support. But if I can just go back quickly, like, how was it diagnosed and what were the challenges that you faced?
So it was just, it was a routine eye checkup and it was diagnosed then. But I also think that we don't have an ecosystem to support diagnosis like that, right? We don't have, doctors maybe are not that sensitized or do not have the information to tell folks where to go after this, right? Yeah. In my case, again, as dark humor as it may sound, I was still privileged because out of us 3 siblings, we 3 siblings, my eldest sibling is my brother, and he also lives with the same condition. So for me, community was at home. For me, my parents had already explored how to support a child who is going blind, right? But for other parents, this kind of support doesn't exist. And I think, or this kind of information is not so easily, or was not so easily available. And I think that's the gap, and that's the biggest challenge that you start from. Yeah. The second biggest challenge is that you've not seen enough people with disabilities around you. Yeah. Again, I had seen someone, but not everyone sees enough of people with disabilities around you. You don't know what they look like, what they can do, what they're capable of, if life with a disability can be lived and can be lived happily. Yeah, do you read fairy tales which have like happily ever after for disabled characters? No. Do you have cinema which has like fun stories where protagonists are disabled? No. Do you have advertising looking at disabled people as their primary customers or even including them in their customer base? No, you don't have these scripts and narratives. And I think that becomes a very real challenge, which is not recognized. Of course, then the challenges of inaccessible infrastructure, insensitive educational or non-supportive educational institutions, your peers sometimes being insensitive and so on and so forth. So I faced a range of challenges and struggles, but I also on the way met very, very, very many lovely people. So I can dive into more struggles, but yes, it was an initial period. The main thing was that from week to week, Ambika, for me, what, and I'll tell you how it changed over the years, right? Then every week when my eyesight deteriorated, one day I could cross the street, the next week, maybe I just got saved by a millimeter because I didn't see the speeding bike, right? So it was not just a bad feeling when people say, oh, you must have emotionally struggled a lot. No, you physically struggle a lot. You realize in the last 1 month you could have met with an accident thrice. But that wasn't the case the month before. And so grappling with every new stage of loss is a constant process.
That's another, yes, for sure.
Right? But also then as a teenager, what I framed it as was that now this is something that I cannot do. And as I matured, as I sort of learned what disability means, how I understood how society and disability need to interact and negotiate, I realized that I could, I discovered every week what I couldn't see, not what I couldn't do. And I think equating the two is a part of ableism that we carry in society.
Absolutely. I think you put that so well. Of course, like you said, infrastructure, whether it's sensitization, inclusion is something, Nidhi, which I think when we talk about whether it's the UN sustainable goals, whether we talk about leaving no one behind, inclusion is key, and love plays a very important role here. Like I said, people need support, empathy. Like you also said that, you need to give the person a chance to move on and succeed in life and not think that, oh, they cannot do it because there's no they and us, right? It's all one. So you've been fortunate, like you said, that your family support was there. What are your thoughts on when it comes to love and inclusion, the connection here, especially for people living with disability?
I think with people with disabilities, we're really hard on them, right? Like we were many years ago very hard on women. At every stage, we want them to prove themselves, right? I remember having this conversation where I said, who is independent? They say, oh, disabled people are not independent, hence they should not be here. They are not quote unquote normal like us. And so we don't think they deserve this. We don't think they deserve any kind of acceptance, love, and so on and so forth. Who's independent? Where does the food that you eat come from? Are you going and cultivating that? Are you producing the gas where you cook it on? Are you manufacturing the stove? We're all interdependent in many ways. Just by providing the money doesn't mean that you wouldn't have survived if people weren't there to put those factories and make the stove, right? I'm just saying that we all claim to be independent in many ways, but we're not. And we never reflect on it because that's quote unquote normal interdependence. We've even made independence and interdependence normal and not normal, right? And I think that's the bigger problem, that when we say love, first of all, we have a very, 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 like a very narrow definition of love. Immediately hearts and balloons and Valentine's Day crops up in people's mind. But when you say love, I think access, thinking of access is love. Right? Not discriminating. When a disabled student comes to class, you either make them into a hero or a zero. People don't even want to interact with them. That's, part of not loving someone, right? Saying this is for normal people, right? From your everyday grocery apps to dating apps. When you say, oh, this is not accessible for people with disabilities, but this is not really for them, right?
You're discriminating.
You're deciding for them, taking decisions on someone's part, not giving them autonomy, not giving them the right to be adults, infantilizing people with disabilities. So these basic rights that we all take for granted, these basic entitlements that we all take for granted, is a part of love. And I think that's what we need to do. I think it's a very big misconception that we say that, oh, people with disabilities need extra help. No, they just need support. You would need support a certain way and I would need support in a certain other way. And so just not restricting the buckets is what love is about.
Actually, discrimination, like you said, whether it's accessibility, whether it's It's actually just the support that one needs, and we all need support in some form or the other. It's just that, I mean, you've really put that well. And yes, love is really not about just romance and hearts and balloons. It's a lot more to it, whether it's empathy, care, support. Nidhi, when again, you spread so much joy in other people's life, obviously because of comedy. How do people, when you do these shows, how do people react to a person performing, when they're I mean, they say, okay, the person is disabled, but how do they react to a person performing comedy or making them laugh when they are disabled? Any incident you would like to share with us?
This is the problem, right? When we frame it as performing comedy when they are disabled, right? The first thing is people get very uncomfortable because disabled people are supposed to be depressed. The quote unquote idea is that if you're disabled, and you remember the image, that the first image as children that we see is this very, very sad looking blind man standing at the corner of the street, and you're supposed to help him. It's your duty, it's your moral duty, right? And so that's the image that we hold of disabled people. The minute a disabled person is cheerful, forget about on stage performing comedy. When I go and smile, people are like, oh, you're so inspiring. And I want to say, what's so inspiring? I'm smiling, you're smiling. I don't think you're inspiring for smiling. Why do you think I'm inspiring for smiling? Because it comes from a prejudice that because I'm disabled, I need to be buried under layers and loads of like struggles and problems and issues. And why can I then enjoy life? I need to barely survive. And these are all very ingrained, right? These are all very, very ingrained. And so when you're on the stage, you're making people uncomfortable on multiple levels. One, that they're like, oh my God, this person will make us laugh. Their life must be so tragic.
Yeah.
Second is there's a woman who's trying to say, and then there's a disabled person who's on the stage, and then everybody's so awkward. And then they're cracking jokes on their disability experiences. I mean, should we laugh? Should we feel sorry for them? I remember, I mean, on stage, I've seen weird reactions, but I remember on a dating app, I was sharing my comedy link. That was generally my introduction to my disability, that I didn't send my comedy to men. They got intimidated on multiple levels because they were like, oh my God, should we like talk to a woman who's a comedian at all? Then she's a feminist. And then, there's also this piece. Yeah. And somebody responded saying, it's so beautiful to see how people cope with their grief in different ways. And I said, why would you assume that? Why would you think I have grief? Like, I understand your disability, and I understand the grief it must be bringing you.
Yeah.
And I think that narrative really needs to shift. Unless that shifts, we're going to have this us and them. We're going to have a false sense of superiority. And we are going to then end up taking decisions, shunning the voices, not giving space and choices to people with disabilities.
Yeah, I think the us and them definitely needs to move away. And like you said, I mean, you, of course, are breaking barriers, whether it's, like you said, rightly, I mean, person with disability performing comedy as well as a woman. So you are definitely breaking all those barriers, Nidhi, and, congratulations and hats off. And like you rightly said, this whole mindset needs to change, that a person living with disability or assuming or taking decisions for them, that shift definitely needs to be brought in. Nidhi, I would also want to ask you about the foundation, which you are a founder and executive director of Rising Flame, which works for recognition, protection, and promotion of human rights of persons with disabilities.
Yes.
So tell us about this organization, Nidhi.
It's really a commitment for me, right? More than an organization. I mean, on paper and compliance, it's an organization, but for me, it's that commitment, that oath that I took in front of my spiritual guru, that I will work for the community. I will recognize my privilege. I will be, focused and committed to building this bridge between disabled and non-disabled, bringing about social integration. I think that's the translation of that commitment, that a teenager losing their sight and knowing that they were not losing a vision, but just a sight. So this is realization of that commitment and really looking at the community. So over a decade, I've been working as an activist, in the development sector. And I really would say that we are working for and with people with disabilities, right? Mm-hmm. The focus, of course, is access, maybe education, employment, because somewhere we're still okay accepting people with disabilities, that, okay, it's okay, they can study. Somehow they should, maybe if they can earn, it is great. Mm-hmm. When I entered activism, I was working on sexual and reproductive health of women with disabilities, right? With a women's rights organization. And I remember people were like, are you joking? Why do you need this? Why do women with disabilities need reproductive health pieces? Like, are you trying to say they'll like be mothers? Are you trying to say they'll have partners? Are you trying to say they'll get married? Oh my God, what are you doing to society, right? These are the kinds of reactions that overtly and covertly people give to me.
Yeah.
On that piece, I saw slowly that people with disabilities were allowed to exist. And we were struggling even for that, right? The disabled community was fighting for years and decades, even just for that.
Yeah.
And for me, that's not enough. If we have the skill, if we level the playing field, if we provide those opportunities and create an enabling environment, why can't people with disabilities have a voice, have a choice, and lead from the front? And for that, Rising Flame came into existence. We work, yes, for rights of persons with disabilities, and we focus tremendously on women and youth with disabilities. Particularly from this space, right? Everywhere else, you'll say women in leadership. Let's talk about this. But in any conversation of women and leadership, you will not see women with disabilities featured. We'll say women and safety, let's prioritize that. Women and health, let's prioritize. Where are women with disabilities in this whole conversation?
Yeah, so
youth are our demographic dividend, but youth with disabilities don't have access to schooling, are denied interviews because they are disabled. They're shortlisted for their skill, but they're denied everything else.
So that, yes, that change, and that's what you're working. Also, you have a campaign, My Tale Too. The foundation is running. Tell us about that. What is the aim, and what is the main thought behind the campaign?
Right. So Rising Flame has many flagship programs, right? Like we have a national level leadership program, which is the first of its kind in the country. We have a rural leadership program. We have a youth program. And one of the programs, actually, it started off as a campaign, and later years we moved it into a project, was My Tale Too. And if you remember in the one of the earlier examples, I was saying that when you're growing up as a disabled person, it's really isolating. Yes. Because where are the people? Where are the representatives? Where are the stories? Where are the narratives? Where are the scripts? And that's what we wanted to change in My Tale Too. We wanted to come together, and we brought women with disabilities. And when I say disabilities, really across disabilities, right? Mm-hmm. So there are blind women in that group. There was someone who was hard of hearing. There was someone who was deaf but could speak. There were women who were on the autism spectrum, so autistic women and so on and so forth, right? Queer women and so on. Mm-hmm. And they all came together, and we conducted this training, and now are soon to be publishing a collection of stories. Wonderful. Where women with disabilities have rewritten fairy tales. So we have a deaf Snow White, we have an autistic ugly duckling. We have a hard of hearing Rapunzel. And many, many beautiful stories. What do these do?
Looking forward to that one.
So thank you, Ambika. What do these do? They bring you into the world of disability. Because often we don't know, we see disabled people as these very inspiring memes. So we're like, wow, they're amazing, yeah. But we don't know how do they walk, talk, live, negotiate life. What happens? What are the discriminations? What is this everyday experience, right? And I think when people ask me about discrimination, so basically this collection highlights, or this collection when it's published soon, will highlight everyday experiences of women with disabilities in a fairy tale, right? In those stories which we grew up listening, reading, and aspiring for. And I think that was very important for us to bridge this divide and say we also exist, here are our experiences, and also to give that hope, saying, hey, happily ever after is not just for you, it's
absolutely. I think bridging the divide, what you rightly said, Nidhi, that's where an inclusion really starts from. Right. Nidhi, just the last question before I'm going to ask you, you've really worked with organizations. We can see, how compassionate you're about, working, whether it's women with disabilities or, so tell us, you've also been with the Global Advisor to the UN Women's Executive Director. And after all this work, where, according to you, are we really lacking in creating an equal society? We've understood the challenges. You've really put it well that we need to bridge this gap. But when we talk about creating an equal society, where are we lacking and what needs to be done?
Can I say everywhere? Will that be too disheartening?
To be honest.
We are improving, but I think the lack is so much. And unfortunately, we don't see the lack in society. We see the lack in persons with disabilities, right? Our focus is the lack in them rather than the lack in society in general. So I'm really glad you asked that question, and thank you for that. I feel like we need to really look at mindsets. If you ask me one thing, I think the mindsets need to change. And why mindsets are so important for me, right? You step out. Who do you interact with? People. Who infantilize you? People. Who is either worshiping you or treating you as a depressed, an unworthy individual? People.
Yeah.
Okay, you can argue saying, but if laws are made and implementation of the laws are done, we'll still have our rights. There are quite a few progressive laws. They're sitting in the books.
Yeah.
Does the implementation and enforcement? People. And I think everywhere, from your everyday interaction of your security guard in your apartment, the person on the street, the shopkeeper that you go to, the taxi driver, the auto driver, to everyone, to your bosses, to your teams, to your teachers, to your peers, all around there are people. And unless mindset, unless this change happens, nothing will happen. And I think I want to circle back to what I said. When someone can't see, someone can't walk, it doesn't mean they cannot do. And I think that's the ableist mindset that we really need to change. We can do things. We do things in a different way. We relearn how to do things. And we also have to call it different because we think something is a normal way to do. If I put you in a room full of blind people, you may be the exception and they may sit and say, hey, you're doing it differently.
Yeah.
And so what's the norm? Challenging that. Who are we calling normal? Challenging that. Yeah. And really shifting mindsets from this whole idea of independence to interdependence, from help and charity to support and empowerment would be extremely important in bringing a social change.
I think you've really put that well. I think it's all about empowering, whether it's discrimination. I mean, really, it is the mindset, because even if you have accessibility, but if you're not if the mind is not changing, if that shift is not brought about, again, we zero back to where it all started. And I guess it is improving. And I think you were really honest that a lot needs to be changed. I mean, everything, like you rightly said. Nidhi, thank you so much for speaking with us. I think the points which you brought out, I think they're very, very critical. And this whole month, I have met people, again, I don't want to use, because you said it's not about them inspiring, but the way, like the way they do things is just different. It's, they may be thinking the way others do things is different, but it's actually about inclusion. It's about empowering them, supporting them. So thank you so much, Nidhi. But just before you go, would you like to, share something with us? Any sort of a small, I wouldn't say an act of comedy, but anything you would like to share, which will make, because it has been a really heart-to-heart conversation. And I think the points which you've put out there are very hard. So anything to, I think, just lighten it?
I'm trying hard. Sorry. No, I don't know if I can really crack a joke here, but I just want to say that it's not really difficult, right? We make it really something that's so like tensed and so, oh my God, like what do we do with these people, right? I think we all need to relax. I think the first thing is just breathe and be like, oh, there's someone coming in. And it's really, sometimes when you get tense, the situation gets funny for us. For example, if I'm trying to cross a passage, if people are in the passage, they want to give me way, but instead of saying that, hi, would you like to go here from the left? They would just silently plaster themselves to the wall. And I want to give people way. So I'm trying to search the wall. And in that whole trying to be helpful to each other, because you don't communicate and you're worried about communicating and you want to stay away from this disabled person, you end up getting hit by my cane.
Yeah.
And this is how it starts getting complicated. This is how it starts getting confusing, and really coming out to people and saying, oh, you're so beautiful, you're still disabled, is not an icebreaker.
Yeah. I think, true. I think breaking that awkwardness is also important. Nidhi, thank you so much. It was wonderful speaking with you. Thank you so much for giving us your time.
Thank you, Ambika. It was a pleasure.